Former Navy chaplain Gordon James Klingenschmidt took a stand to defend religious freedom by daring to pray publicly in Jesus' name. Now he helps you by reporting the news, discerning the spirits, and praying the scriptures. Would you pray with us? Here's Dr. Chaps.
Dr. Chaps at Western Conservative Summit. Michael Farris is the lead Christian attorney for Alliance Defending Freedom and now president of ADF. Welcome, Michael, to the program.
It is great to be with you.
So a lot of our viewers know you as perhaps founder, former chancellor of Patrick Henry University. You are also leading on the Convention of States, which I think Jim DeMint just took your job, sort of.
That's right. I'm glad that Jim took over.
But you moved to take over ADF from Alan Sears.
Right.
Describe the transition and why did you do this?
Well, Alan felt called by God to go to a new season of life where he's still with ADF, but it's a more back, behind the scenes kind of role, promoting our development and other things. And so there was a national search for a leader. And the reason I applied is I looked at the various aspects of the job. Everything that had been kind of a disjointed part of my life all came together. I've defended religious freedom. I've worked on pro-life, the sanctity of marriage. I've helped train young people to be leaders in the law. I've worked on international religious freedom issues. All of those attributes are things that ADF does. And I just felt God was calling me to step in, move over, and to go farther and deeper than what I've been doing.
And as an attorney, you're actually one of what I consider the founding fathers of the modern American homeschooling movement. How did homeschooling prepare you for what you're about to do, and that is legal defense of Christians under fire?
Well, one of the really important stories that arises from that is homeschoolers were against all odds. The teachers union hated the right of homeschoolers, the officials, the attorney generals of the various states, and we systematically stood firm, fought back, despite all odds, and saw God deliver. So when we see dark clouds coming for religious freedom, for churches, for Christian business owners, for many other people, I believe, because I've seen it with my own eyes, God deliver against all odds. We learned that lesson, and I believe that's a transferable reason and a concept that I need to bring to the fore for all Christians.
So if our audience is not familiar, let's say there's a Christian pastor out there or a Christian cake baker, and they're minding their own business, but suddenly they're getting sued by leftist liberals. Who can they pick up the phone and call, and what does ADF do for them?
ADF does those cases. The case that is before the Supreme Court of the United States for the Christian cake designer that refuses to use his artistic skills, Jack Phillips, for a same-sex wedding. That's our case we're going to argue in the Supreme Court. We represent the Christian florists. We represent pastors, churches all over this country. You pick up the phone, you call Alliance Defending Freedom. We'll be there. We charge nothing for our services.
It's pro bono.
It's pro bono every time. And so if they have a case that involves religious freedom issues, we're the people to turn to.
Now, recently the left, their heads are exploding over the losses they've been delivered in court, because you guys win a lot of cases. But the SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center, has called all of the Christian lawyers at ADF part of a hate group. And that libel, that slander, was repeated by ABC and NBC on national news last week. Right. How do you respond?
Well, they're a major and successful fundraising organization, and there's no substance to them or their charges. This is a fundraising gimmick of a far-left propagandist. ADF is a respected legal advocate. We have won 7 cases in the last few years in the Supreme Court of the United States. We won the Trinity Lutheran case that stops religious discrimination. Our views are religious freedom is for everybody, including people who object to being forced to participate in same-sex weddings. Because we believe in that, that's why they say we're despicable. But that's not true. We are standing for the religious freedom of everybody.
And that same group has labeled our friend Matt Staver with Liberty Counsel a hate group, me and Pray in Jesus' Name a hate group. Why do these labels have so much effectiveness, and why does the mainstream media now want to repeat that?
Well, it's good propaganda. It's a clever name. I get that, but it was applied historically to groups like the Ku Klux Klan, and that's appropriate there. Racism and the kind of violence that was being done by that organization, that was true hate. But what's going on now is it's reversed totally. They are trying to coerce and silence Christians. The people who are trying to silence others, those are the ones who are anti-American, violating our fundamental values, violating our First Amendment freedoms. And so it's just totally flipped. The FBI used to recognize this group as a legitimate source of information. Under President Obama, the FBI took them off their site because they were utterly unreliable.
So uncredible, and the fake news should stop repeating the fake labels.
Exactly.
So let's transition away from that. Talk about some important cases that ADF attorneys are defending around the country besides the Bakers that are going to the Supreme Court.
Well, there's a number of free speech cases on college campuses where at Battle Creek, Michigan, a community college there, students were passing out copies of a controversial document, and they were outside the so-called free speech zone and got arrested. This document was the Constitution of the United States.
Oh, no.
And so they got arrested for passing out the Constitution. There is a free speech zone in this country. It's called America.
Everywhere is a free speech.
That's exactly right. And so the idea that you have to get the government's permission to pass off the Constitution is utterly reprehensible. That same exact fact pattern was repeated in a school in Battle Creek, Michigan, the community college there. In Georgia, there's a case where a young man went in the free speech zone, complying with these silly rules, preached the gospel of Jesus Christ, and because somebody was offended by the gospel, they punished him at that school. We're litigating that. The fire chief in Atlanta, who was fired from his job by the liberal mayor of Atlanta for writing a Christian book on his own time to the men in his own church. He had a couple of paragraphs or so that related to his view about same-sex marriage, and because of that, he was fired from his job as chief of police in Atlanta. There are case after case like that, and we're standing for the religious freedom of people all over the country.
Defending the First Amendment is something 30, 40 years ago the ACLU used to do. Yeah. But now the ACLU is targeting Christians, and ADF has taken up the slack. You're defending Christians' First Amendment freedoms, and I want to say I salute you. Thank you for leading that organization. How can people contact you or get involved or donate? What do you need?
Well, we need support, prayers, we need help, we need volunteers, we need ambassadors, we need local attorneys. The way to contact us is go to our website, adflegal.org. We'd love to have them involved.
adflegal.org. This is a mentor to so many in our activist generation. Michael Farris, lead attorney and president of Alliance Defending Freedom. Thank you, Michael, for coming on the program.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right.
All right.
I'm Dr. Chaps. We'll be right back. Today I want to invite you to sign an important petition to Congress to protect military chaplains, especially their right to pray publicly in Jesus' name. If you remember my story, you know that I was vindicated by Congress in 2006 after I took a principled stand for the right to pray in Jesus' name. But Congress never did pass a positive law to let chaplains pray according to their conscience. Would you sign that petition with me? Let's take action today.
Empowering you, the grassroots activist. Here is Dr. Chaps.
Welcome back. Dr. Chaps at the Western Conservative Summit, joined now by a rock star in the Colorado State Legislature, Steve Humphrey, one of my heroes and mentors. Steve, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Gordon, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you at the Western Conservative Summit.
So you are now that I've left the Colorado State House, I want to say that you are perhaps the most Christian, conservative, top cut scorer. Colorado Union of Taxpayers always rates you a champion or guardian for limited government, lower taxes, but that's not what I'm here to talk. I notice you're wearing a pro-gun bill, a pin, your Second Amendment champion.
Second Amendment, that's right, absolutely. We need to protect our gun rights and maintain our constitutional rights in this country and the state.
And lower taxes and all that, all the good conservative Republican stuff. But you are an evangelical Christian.
I certainly am.
And you legislate your Christian values, especially when it comes to the right to life and the fight against abortion in Colorado.
Absolutely. I mean, we need to have a voice in the Capitol that advocates for our values and our principles. And I make sure that I do that every session I come down here. When I first ran in 2012, a predecessor up in my neck of the woods, up in House District 48, up in Weld County, was Senator Scott Renfro, and he had run a pro-life bill that would have made abortion illegal in the state of Colorado.
Are you talking about the Life Begins at Conception Act?
That's what we've called it since then. Yes, correct. The Life at Conception Act.
Now, how is that different than other abortion management legislation? Yours is almost an outright ban.
It would make abortion illegal. It would make it illegal to take the life of an innocent human being. The fact that human being is unborn is immaterial. We're talking about human life that begins at conception. So, absolutely. So that differs from other bills that are anti-abortion bills that would regulate various aspects of the industry, and not necessarily if there's anything wrong with those bills, but this one goes straight to the heart of the issue, which is the life issue.
And you've been elected, I think, 3 times. You're in your 5th or 6th year there, and you run that bill every year. So 5 or 6 times every year, you try to defend the right to life of the unborn children. That makes you persistent and a champion in my view. But what do the Democrats say about you? What do you hear about when your bill goes to committee?
Well, thanks for the kind words, Gordon. And yeah, every year I have brought that bill because constituents in my district ask me, "Are you going to run that? You're going to run that bill, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." Can you run it every year? And I'm like, "Well, if I'm down there, absolutely. Why wouldn't I do that?" So, the Democrats, they don't like the bill. I mean, it makes them have to defend their position on that issue, and that's very difficult to do. And as one legislator did during committee hearings, he held up a picture of an unborn human being in committee and asked them, "What do you see in this picture?" And they said, "Representative Klingenschmidt, I see a fetus," or some other sort of, They wanted to dehumanize that unborn child so they could kill it. Absolutely. And you did a great job in committee, Gordon. Every single pro-abortion witness that came in there to testify, Gordon had one question, and that was, "What do you see in this picture?" And it put them on the spot, really did, and that's what the issue is about. So I appreciate that.
And if I remember, that was an actual ultrasound picture of the child of who's now the minority leader, Patrick Neville. His baby is now a 2-year-old breathing, beautiful little girl, and at the time in committee, they wouldn't even acknowledge that she was a human being. Why do you care so much about that issue?
Well, I mean, obviously, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our country was founded on Christian principles, and as a Christian, I have a very strong conviction that we need to protect human life. And the argument that a person isn't because to come up with the argument that a person isn't a person, that a human being isn't a person, is a very slippery slope issue, and that's been used historically in very bad ways. Another issue that you brought up in committee hearings about Dred Scott and the Supreme Court precedent, and the argument that African American was not a human being or a person, and so. That was controversial in committee, but
which was a horrific Supreme Court decision. We're glad that was later overturned, but the liberals are still making that same argument about unborn children. That's not really a person. I personally agree with Dr. Seuss. You remember Horton Hears a Who? They said, "A person's a person, no matter how small." Talk about religious liberty. You've carried a couple of bills that I've seen about defending pastors' rights and to do what?
I passed a very broad bill, which is a Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and it simply reaffirms our First Amendment rights to free exercise of religion. And it's the standard at the federal level, but the states have to pass it themselves in order to have those same protections. And obviously we need those in Colorado because of what we've seen happening to bakers and what's happening with the Civil Rights Commission and the way they crack down against people's free exercise of religion, which is clearly protected in the Constitution.
Like Jack Phillips, the baker, who's now going to the United States Supreme Court, he was punished in Colorado by the Civil Rights Commission because he would not make a gay wedding cake. But your bill would have fixed that, would have protected his religious freedom right to opt out, or at least limited the big government sledgehammer for pounding him back into place.
Absolutely. I mean, it would put us back where we were before, where we tolerated different points of view, and you could simply go to another baker, and that individual who had a conscience objection would be respected, and the person that had a different view of sexual orientation would be respected and be allowed to go to another business. That's the way it's been historically in this country, and that's the way it needs to continue to be.
Well, we're praying for Jack Phillips and for that victory, and eventually, if we have a Republican majority in the State House, maybe your bill will someday become law.
That'd be fantastic. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see a majority in the House, and for us to be able to get some of those bills over to the Senate and then get them sent up to the governor. So it's a very, very big year, big election coming up. So
I'm just making the assumption you're going to run for re-election for your fourth term, another 2 years in the State House. Who knows what your future is after that? Where can people support you or learn about your candidacy?
Thank you, Gordon. At humphreyforhouse.org, humphreyforhouse.org. That's a great place to go and contribute, and we always appreciate that and look for that support. So thank you, and thank you again for your service. So.
All right. It's an honor to serve with people like this because he has his priorities right. It's God and Jesus and the Bible and the Constitution, and our rights, human rights, flow from that. Thank you, Steve, for coming on the program.
Thank you, Gordon. God bless.
All right. I'm Dr. Chaps. We'll be right back. Today, I want to invite you to sign an important petition to Congress to protect military chaplains, especially their right to pray publicly in Jesus' name. If you remember my story, you know that I was vindicated by Congress in 2006 after I took a principled stand for the right to pray in Jesus' name. But Congress never did pass a positive law to let chaplains pray according to their conscience. Would you sign that petition with me? Let's take action today.
Defending your religious freedom. Here is Dr. Chaps.
We have a returning guest, Jimmy Sengenberger with the Millennial Policy Institute. It's a think tank. If you don't know what that is, you're about to find out. Jimmy, welcome back to the program.
Hey, it's great to be here. I appreciate the time here at the summit.
So we talked to you last year at the Red State Gathering. Now you're here at the Western Conservative Summit. Very similar audiences, but you're making a lot of traction here. Your think tank has grown since we last talked to you. Give us a progress report.
Well, it's been tremendous. The Millennial Policy Center has grown into a number of articles in mainstream publications, Weekly Standard, National Review, Forbes, Washington Examiner, a number of different places, and it really is just an exciting opportunity to get a voice out there to millennials and on behalf of millennials about the issues our country's facing today.
And you come to things from sort of a liberty-minded framework, and yet you have specific policy items that you write articles about. And who are your contributors and what do they write about?
Well, what we have are a series of fellows, predominantly millennials, but not entirely. We're a cross-generational think tank. We're writing and focusing on healthcare, higher education reform, and we're about to launch our tax reform effort. So those are very important, and they've been dominating a lot of our discussion, particularly healthcare. I mean, that's been top of mind for so many different people when it comes to the issues that are facing the country and in the political sphere, and we've been playing into that quite a bit.
Now, the Bernie Sanders crowd of your generation has been told that healthcare is a right, that everybody has a right to make the doctors treat us without pay, or to make the taxpayers fund our health insurance and we don't have to lift a finger. You have a different idea.
Well, I would ask them this question. What is a right? A right is the sovereign ability to act, which means the ability to do something, to take action, to say something without having to ask the government for permission. To require that somebody provides a service like healthcare is a mandate. It's a requirement of somebody. It's not a right because somebody else has to do that, and that in many ways impinges on their rights. So being able to talk a little bit about the definition of what a right is something that we would do in a conversation like that. But I do want to say that I think you also need to pivot to saying there are other better ways to address the healthcare crisis than what we've been doing and what some people are trying to do, which is socialized medicine.
Well, this is a big debate on what kind of Obamacare repeal the U.S. Senate is willing to go along with. The House passed their version, but our senator here in Colorado, Cory Gardner, has been under fire. Democrat socialist protesters have been invading his office and demanding more Medicaid expansion for able-bodied adults who don't want to have to pay for their own health insurance. What would you advise Senator Cory Gardner?
I think, first of all, he's got to stay on principle, stay on the idea that we need to repeal and replace Obamacare, but engage the folks that are willing to engage in a respectful way. I know that's hard to sift through sometimes with protesters. Last night, for example, we had some protesters interrupting the senator's remarks. But I think one of the things that he really needs to do is just engage them in conversation as best he can. I think he's been doing that a lot with telephone town halls and telephone conversations, but even having a couple meetings in person. I think to explain his position and film those meetings and so forth, I think that would be a great way to not only get across your point that you're not a villain, but you're trying to do what you think is in the best interest of Coloradans and the American people. And instead, have that conversation with them to get that point across, and then share that video out in the mainstream social media outlets and so forth. I think Denver Post would even pick that up. It'd be a great tool to use.
Well, I saw a report, and I don't know if this is truly Senator Gardner's position, but he sided with some of the moderate Republicans, like the ones from Maine or Alaska or West Virginia, who want to continue Medicaid expansion. Would that be seen, if that is his position, as sort of a cave-in to the left? He's keeping Obama's mandate, and he's disagreeing with President Trump, who wants to repeal and replace.
First of all, I'm not exactly sure where he stands on the Medicaid issue. I don't know that I would necessarily call it a cave-in, but I would say that it is the wrong approach. The problem with Medicaid, fundamentally, is that it puts people on the government dole. I mean, that's what this is consistently having more people that are specifically benefiting from government programs. And I've talked with one of our fellows who's not a millennial, but Dr. Michael Parra. He was a retired oncologist for 25 years. And he has approached this from the perspective of a physician who's dealt with a lot of Medicaid patients. And he says once somebody gets on Medicaid, they never get off. That's a problem financially. We can't sustain that across the country, but also it inhibits the ability for a free market to be created centered around the individual in the first place. So it certainly would be the wrong approach.
And it makes those unfortunate people dependent on government handouts, and ultimately makes them, I think, more enslaved to the big government bureaucracy for the rest of their life. They're not self-supporting, they're not self-initiating, they're probably not going to be able to liberate themselves in the economic free market that you advocate.
Oh, exactly. It's called the poverty trap. I mean, when you have welfare programs or Medicaid or what have you, once you get stuck in the poverty trap, you're stuck. I mean, the chances of you getting off of that are significantly low unless the government provides incentives or requirements that mandate that you, say, get work or what have you. One great reform for Medicaid would be to have work requirements and some of the conservative versions of the...
For able-bodied people, not for disabled people,
yes.
But for able-bodied people, they should be able to work.
I think that's a great point when we're talking about able-bodied people versus disabled. So that's a great point. I appreciate you mentioning that.
So what are some other policy tracks? You mentioned one that you recently published on. I forget what it was. And then what are you doing in the future?
Well, higher education reform. We talk in a extensive paper that folks can find on our website, millennialpolicycenter.org. If they go to that website, they can find our healthcare paper and our higher ed paper, as well as some videos on both of those subjects. In higher ed, we talked about the reasons why government specifically is driving up the cost of higher education. And that is widely because of all the money that's being floating out there, and there's a lot of research, including from the Federal Reserve, to emphasize that point. So we published a paper and a video and have written pieces in different publications about that. We're just about to start really tackling tax reform and presenting a millennial perspective in favor of broad-based tax reform, setting forward our principles, setting forward what we would like to see in an ideal system, and setting forward some practical goals that should be achieved by members of Congress.
So here's a simple example, and I heard this, the Bernie Sanders crowd, the socialists, they all want free college for millennials, or now we call them centennials, the generation after yours. Free college for everyone, and the taxpayer is going to fund that. Why is that a bad idea?
Well, I think fundamentally it comes to exacerbating the cost crisis, because what we've shown in our research is that the more that the government is throwing out, whether it's loans, grants, especially subsidized loans, and all of these grants and so forth, the higher the cost of college has risen. There is a direct correlation, I would say, between that. And so the problem is, if you're going to provide free college for everybody, then you're only going to exacerbate that problem. The difference is that taxpayers are going to have to be propping up what will essentially be, and already arguably is, a bubble in higher education. So it's something that could burst, and it requires a significant amount of money. We're at $1.4 trillion in student loan debt, and it's fast rising. Having government get involved in the process even more than it already is would just exacerbate the problems that exist already.
So stop subsidizing college tuition, because if college used to cost $10,000, but government is going to pay an extra $10,000 on top of that, guess what? Now government costs tuition costs $30,000, and your tuition doubled. The taxpayers are pouring into this black hole, and the costs keep going up and up and up.
Exactly. And the other thing that's a big component of that is the colleges look at this and say, hey, all this money is available. Why not raise up the price? So supply and demand has a real factor in this, but also the incentives are there for colleges and universities to raise their costs. There are certainly a lot more things that we can be doing, and that's why I was excited to address that in our higher ed paper.
So it sounds to me like your think tank really presents liberty-minded, economically and fiscally responsible approaches to lower people's college tuition costs in the long run.
Absolutely. I mean, what we need to be looking at is ways to reform our student loan system. We need to tie it to college institutions so that you can, for example, declare bankruptcy. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to declare bankruptcy on student loans. And so now what you should be able to do is declare bankruptcy if it's necessary, rather than forgiving student loans. And then what you have is you have a tie-in where the university pays, say, 5% of the value on the defaulting obligation. So you have an incentive for the universities to provide loans to students that are going to take seriously their education. Many students do, of course, and then they get into a bind. But you have a little bit of skin in the game for the higher ed institutions. Plenty more things to do, but free market's absolutely the way to go.
And that really holds the higher ed institutions accountable to start teaching technical skills instead of underwater basket weaving, where you get a liberal arts degree and you can never find a job. You get a real degree, you'll get a real job when you come out. Instead, I think a lot of millennials are frustrated maybe. They got this degree, they have all this college debt, they can't find a job because their college ripped them off with a bad education.
Now, I'll tell you, I was just smiling a moment ago because I was thinking about our video. We have a video where I'm explaining the real reasons costs in college are skyrocketing, and we have a character who's in the background who's kind of giving this spiel, trying to sell you a college degree. His name is Bill O'Goods, and he's like a used car salesman.
Oh no.
And if you go to millennialpolicycenter.org, it's right there on our website where you can watch the video yourself. But it's an entertaining way to approach a serious issue, interspersing some humor and levity with some of the serious discussion about the real reasons this issue is such a big one.
That is fantastic. You're growing up quickly. I admire you every time I meet you. But Jimmy Sengenberger, only 12 letters in Sengenberger. There's 14 letters in Klingenschmitt, by the way. Dr. Chaps here. Visit his website. Send him an email. Jimmy@libertyday.org. We'll be right back.
Dr. Chaps needs your financial support to stay on the air. Would you please send your best donation today? Please visit PrayInJesusName.org to donate online. Or you can mail a check to Pray in Jesus Name Ministries, Post Office Box 77077, Colorado Springs, Colorado 80970. You can also call us toll-free right now at 866-OBEY-GOD. That's 866-OBEYGOD. Please sign up for our free emails at PrayInJesusName.org. Again, that's PrayInJesusName.org.